So again, I'm continuing on with our unseries this morning, and they're statements that hugely affect our lives. The first one we talked about unswervingly or holding steady in the face of persecution. The second one was unquenchable, and it talked about pursuing our thirst for God. The third one was unnoticed, and it was we did the persecuted church, we did the Remembrance Day stuff, but the question was, does God see us in our trials, or are we unnoticed? And the fourth one, was unknown. And we talked about, are you ready for Jesus' return? When he returns, the day and the hour will be unknown. And then today in part 5, we're talking about unseen and how to live our lives in light of eternity and in light of the unseen realm. So on the first slide, 2 Corinthians 4:18 is our key verse on that. And it says, so we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but what is unseen. Since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. And you know, as we get older, hopefully a little bit more mature, our wants and our wishes change quite a bit. Our priorities, they change quite a bit. You know, in our family for Christmas, we're exchanging names for Christmas. And, you know, every year I think, I don't have any wants or things. How do you figure out what to put on that list? I can go out and buy anything that I want. What can they, you know, and if it's $50 or $100, you know, what can you really get for that these days, right? And, you know, I can buy it for myself. Or you think about maybe lotteries. Lotteries often display our wants and our wishes. And I remember back to, how many here have gone to the P&E? Right? And when you come walking in, win a house, win a car, or, you know, and you know, the lottery is right there. Or maybe the lottery, you know, talking about how many million you can win this time. It's 66 million or whatever, you know. It's huge amounts. And, oh boy, does that just draw us in. But it draws us in to futile things. And hopefully, we've come to the place in our Christian walk where we've grown up past those things. You know, someone this week very excitedly sat down right in front of me and had 8 scratch-and wins, and they were scratching away, and they were someone that was poor, and they couldn't even afford to do that. But yet they were looking for the payout that just didn't come. You know, those scratch-and-wins or those lotteries or things like that, we often just spend more buying those things than we ever get out of them, right? And I look at lotteries as, you know, you're putting your faith in fast money. We're putting our faith in wanting to get fast money. And we're hoping that will bring us peace. This morning, our picture of success hopefully changes as we get older. You know, when we're younger, we try climbing up, running up the corporate ladder, trying to make it to the top. We scramble to climb up, but then when you get older, now we're looking for ways to climb down and slow things down. And we're willing to exchange a little extra money for lifestyle and priorities. The things that once looked so important to us have kind of lost their shininess, have they not? So as we get older, we learn that real treasures in life aren't things that we actually can hold in our hands. The real treasures are the unseen moments, the joy, the peace, the connection with people, those things that we can cherish in our heart. The Apostle Paul tells us in 2 Corinthians 4:18 to fix our eyes on things that we cannot see. You know, I read that verse and I think it's kind of an oxymoron, isn't it? You know, oxymorons, the next slide, words that seem to contradict each other, being alone together, bitter, sweet, civil war. I mean, those things don't really go together, right? Clearly misunderstood, deafening silence, deceptively honest, a definite maybe. Like they contradict. And here in the Bible, this might seem like a bit of an oxymoron, to fix our eyes on the unseen, to look at nothing. Right? That sounds very strange, doesn't it? How do you focus on something that's invisible? But over and over in the Bible, it tells us that there is an unseen realm, and we as Christians need to work with the unseen realm. We need to work with God. And in fact, not just to work with it, we are to value the unseen realm. We need to value it over what is seen. The seen is like the shadows that you saw in the video, the hand shadows. The seen is like the shadows that we see there. How many did hand shadows when they were kids? Everybody, right? How many of you grandparents have done that for your grandkids, and just entertaining them, right, and stuff, and teaching them, and you're talented. I'm not talented. I can do one hand shadow. It's the dog. That's it. It's all I can do, and that's the peak of my talent. But the reality here is, those are just shadows. And the Bible often says that the things of this world are temporary and fleeting. They are just shadows. In the next slide, in the book of James, James 4:14, he puts it this way: you are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. Our physical world, the seen world, it looks important, and it actually is important, but it's only a shadow of something greater. There was a man named Jim who had spent his whole life chasing after finances, chasing after money, financial success. He ended up building a big company. He lived in a huge house. He retired early. But after a few years, he admitted, he says, I feel like I've been chasing shadows. Everything that I thought was solid has left me feeling hollow. We do that. We chase the shadows instead of chasing the light, the source of light behind them. And don't get me wrong this morning, I'm not saying that it's bad to have nice things, and I'm not saying it's bad to work hard to get ahead. I'm not saying that. But when we only focus on what is seen, or those shadows, we can miss what is happening in the eternal, what God is doing, the unseen. We might miss out on what God wants to do in us and through us. So let me start with the first unseen. Things unseen that we can dig our teeth into. Let's start with prayer. The power of unseen prayer on the next slide. Jesus says in Matthew 6:6, but when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen, and then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. And in our culture, you might think, hey, that's kind of weird. I don't know if I've mentioned this story before, but when I went to Bible school, like a zillion years ago, I remember coming. I started at Christmas time, just after Christmas, and I'm the first one there. And I go into my room and I find my bunk, and down the hallway I hear a mouse or a rat or some noise. I don't know what it is, and so I start searching it out, and I go into a couple other rooms, and finally there's something in that closet. And, I'm thinking a rat. And so I finally open the door, and there is a guy, a Bible school student. He is sitting down, knees all crunched up in his closet, praying. Just like the verse says, go to your closet and pray in secret. And that's what he was doing. And in our culture, we like to... We're kind of obsessed with being visible, We like to be seen and heard. Facebook, man, the rants and the raves and the likes and the shares and the recognition, all of that. But Jesus says the most powerful moments in life, the most powerful moments are the ones that no one sees. Things done in secret. You know, even at the church here, we have public prayers, right? In different places, there are public prayers. And public prayers bring us together. They help us to be one with each other. Secret prayers in our prayer closet helps us to be one with God. It's those secret times. It's those prayer closet times that are so, so important. You know, in my private prayer time, I love to be alone, and it's those times where you can get real with God. You don't have to have perfect prayers. You have no audience watching over you, which is so great. And, you know, it's where you can be real. And it's where that, you know, you're going through things and maybe you're crying and you got snot hanging down and, you know, you don't do that, huh? Anyways, that's just for me. And the crying prayers, then you have the shouting prayers, and you have the silent prayers, just listening for an answer from God. Never forget hearing about a grandmother. Her name was Betty. Every morning she'd close the door and hide in her bedroom because she had grandkids. I understand that. I like to hide in the bedroom too. And but she would hide in the bedroom. She'd sit in the rocking chair, and she would spend time praying for her family. Her grandchildren, they lived with her, and they had no idea what was she doing behind closed doors. The door was locked, you know, it was a private time, right? What was she doing behind closed doors? They didn't figure it out until years later. And then one of them became a missionary, and he said, it wasn't my doing that I became a missionary. It was Grandma's unseen prayers that paved the way. You know, this morning, I want you to get this. Unseen doesn't mean unimportant. Unseen doesn't mean unimportant. In fact, unseen is quite often the opposite to unimportant. Looking back to the Bible in 2 Kings chapter 6, there's a cool story. It kind of opens our eyes to the unseen world. The prophet Elisha and his servant are surrounded by an enemy army, and when the servant sees that enemy army out there, he starts screaming like a little girl. Well, no, he didn't, but he panics. And in the 2 Kings 6 verse 8, it says, now the king of Aram was at war with Israel. And after conferring with his officers, he says, I will set up my camp in such and such a place. Verse 14, then he sent horses and chariots and a strong force there. They went by night and surrounded the city. Verse 15, when the servant of the man of God got up and went out early the next morning, an army with horses and chariots had surrounded the city. Oh no, my lord, what shall we do? The servant asked. Verse 16, don't be afraid, the prophet answered. Those who are with us are more than those who are with them. And Elisha prayed to God, open his eyes, Lord, so that he may see. And then the Lord opened the servant's eyes, and he looked and he saw the hills full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. You know, Elisha's servant thought that they were going to be slaughtered there and then. He was looking at what was visible. He was looking at the here and now. But he didn't see that God's unseen power was protecting them the whole time. That army didn't just show up when Elijah prayed. That army was there already ahead of time. How often do we panic when things are seen by us in this realm, in this world? How often because we look at the wrong thing. We see the bills piling up, the medical report comes out, the family conflict that's going on, and we think, this is it. There's no way out. It's just terrible. And just like Elisha's servant, we need to ask God, open our eyes so we can see what you are doing. I need to see your unseen things, the unseen work that you are doing, Lord. You might think, okay, Pastor Cliff, that was back then with Elisha and his servant, but this is now. How can we do that today? We're people with jobs, we have families, we have responsibilities, we live with an eternal. How can we live with an unseen eternal perspective? How can we live in that kind of same world that Elisha lived in? Well, here are 4 ideas that we can take home with us today. The next slide. The first one is the unseen is there that it should create a space for secret prayer. The unseen should create a space for secret prayer in our lives. Jesus modeled that. He withdrew from his disciples. He withdrew from the crowds, and the Bible says it this way. He withdrew to lonely places. He withdrew to be by himself, right? And so that's modeled by Jesus, our Savior. We need to do that. We need to withdraw to those places by ourselves. Back to Matthew 6:6, it says, when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. So how can we do that? Well, if you don't have a regular prayer life right now, start small. Find 10 minutes a day in the morning, in the evening. Sit in silence with God. Sit in silence with God. Often we want to come with our whole list of things that we need to tell him. Oh, Lord, this is going crazy. That's awful. Sit in silence before God. Close the door. Turn off the music. Listen for what we call the still small voice of God. Let him speak into your life and then start praying about those things. Watch your heart as you listen for God's voice. Watch your heart fall in love with his heart. And then, like the verse says, he will reward you. Watch how God's promises will be poured out upon you, how the rewards will come in so many different ways. Sit in silence before God, unseen by everybody else. The second way is the unseen. We need to see people through God's eyes. We need to see people through God's eyes. Philippians 2:3 says, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, rather in humility value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of others. When you're stuck in traffic here in Vernon because all the Albertans are here. Okay, my pet peeve. Stuck in traffic or waiting in line at the store, we need to practice seeing people as God sees them. That angry man that you bump into, maybe they're dealing with, a dying wife or something like that. Or maybe they have a past that has just messed them up. And we need to see them through God's eyes. Maybe that cashier that is just moving really slowly and maybe doesn't know it, maybe can't even count the change, and you're thinking, don't you know anything, and maybe they're carrying a heavy burden. But there's unseen stories behind people's lives, and if we consider that everybody has a story, we might have a little more compassion in those times. We need to see people through God's eyes instead. And that will change how we interact with them. The third way is the unseen is investing in eternal relationships. Remember what Jesus said in Matthew 6:3. When you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret, then he will reward you. That secret word again. The unseen, the rewards that come from the unseen. But it's investing in the eternal, helping the needy. But it's not just, we're talking on that verse, it's not just helping financially the needy, but spiritually the needy. Because it goes on in Matthew 6:20, it says, store up for yourselves treasures in heaven. And that's not talking about, hoarding the gold bars above you in your attic. It's not talking about that. It means pouring our lives out, living for others, mentoring the younger person, sharing your faith with somebody, listening to a friend that's in need, that needs encouragement, praying for them, right? It's those kind of things, the unseen things. This past week, someone shared with me, I was very excited about it. They had sold something on Marketplace. And the person came, and the person was flustered, and the person had needs, and I don't remember the whole story, but they were not in a good way, the person buying this article. And the woman selling it just said, I'm a Christian. Can I pray for you? And that broke their heart. Like it touched them. That's investing in eternal relationships, right? We can go throughout our day and neglect all those things so easily, but I was inspired by that story that I need to do that more. The fourth way is trusting God with the unseen. The fourth unseen is trusting God with the unseen. That's, again, almost an oxymoron. Unseen, trusting God with the unseen. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 tells us, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not unto your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your path straight. And sometimes that unseen work of God requires us just to let go and let God. We need to let God have control. We need to trust his guiding. And especially we need to do that when we can't see what he's doing, when the unseen is going on and you're thinking, what is up? Right? We need to, okay, Lord, I don't see into that realm, in the unseen realm, but I trust you. I know your word. Your word has said this, this, and this. And so because of that, I trust what is going on in the unseen realm is for my good. Right? And so to trust him in it. I'm going to close with this story. It's an ugly story. It's a story of the eternal or the unseen view of things. There was a man, his name was Horatio Spafford. He lived in the 1800s. And this guy, he was very successful. He was well known for sharing his faith. He and his wife Anna, they were very active in their church. They would always open their home to people, and great people. They hung out with this renowned evangelist, Dwight L. Moody, and over Horatio's life, God blessed him and Anna with 5 children, great wealth. Horatio was a lawyer. He owned a great deal of property in the city that he lived. And then something happened, and the Job syndrome came upon him. He lost his son to illness. He ended up losing his fortune to a fire. He ended up losing his daughters in a shipwreck. His son was 4 years old. Horatio Jr. was his name. Picked up scarlet fever and he passed away. Then a year later, October 1871, a massive fire swept throughout downtown Chicago, devastating the city. And many of Horatio's properties were devastated. And great financial loss to him and his family, but that didn't stop him from helping all those around him that were still in need. That day, the story goes that 300 people lost their lives, and around 100,000 became homeless on that day. 2 years later, Horatio and Anna and their 4 girls, the son passed away already, they decided they were going to take a holiday to England, and they were looking to connect up with their evangelist friend. Horatio was delayed because of business, so he sent his family ahead. And on the 22nd of November, 1873, while crossing the Atlantic on a steamship, their ship was struck by an iron sailing ship. 226 people drowned that day. Their ship sank in less than 12 minutes. His wife Anna was one of the few that were rescued, but all of their daughters drowned. So Horatio, he's grief-stricken at the news. Who wouldn't be? Gets his ticket. He goes to cross the Atlantic to meet his grieving wife. And during the voyage, the captain called him up to the captain's deck and the captain to the bridge of the ship. And the captain showed him on the charts, explained to him, "Sir, we are passing over the very spot where your wife's ship had sunk and where your daughters have died." The story goes, it was at that moment that Horatio returned to his cabin and wrote the hymn, "It is well with my soul." First line being, when peace like a river attendeth my way. Like, how do you do that? How do you live in that unseen realm? How do you see into that unseen realm when you go through things like that? Horatio learned to fix his eyes on the unseen God, on the unseen realm. And it didn't just happen on the ship that day that he wrote that song. It has to happen way before that, so that when we go through things, we respond like we should. When peace like the song goes, when peace like a river attendeth my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever my lot, thou hast taught me to say, it is well with my soul. You don't have it up there, but the second verse goes, though Satan should buffet, though trials should come, let this blessed assurance control, that Christ has regarded my helpless estate, and hath shed his own blood for my soul. To write these words in the midst of your tragedy. On the next slide, to be able to write those words was because of that unseen relationship that he had with his God. The relationship that he had behind closed doors. 2 Corinthians 4:18, so we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen. Since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. I'm going to invite our worship team to come up. But here's my challenge for you today as they're coming up. We need to look beyond the shadows. We need to step into the unseen reality of God's presence and God's power. We need to spend time in quiet prayer, finding our prayer room, finding our prayer closet, being alone with the Lord. That's where we find our peace. And when we learn God's peace, then when the trials and tragedies come, that peace wins out. We need to spend time in quiet prayer. We need to invest in people. And we need to trust God. We need to be in His Word to know His plan, His eternal plan. We need to trust God with that and walk along arm in arm with Him. I want to close by having the worship team lead us in that song that Horatio wrote.